we had a big discussion on who's going to introduce our guest for the day. And we decided that the person who introduces this guest must be the person who knows him for the longest length of time. I'm happy to tell you that I won this battle easily by a huge margin. It is rare that I have to introduce somebody and I can say I know him for more than half a century, because it gives away my age and his age as well. But I have to say that our guest today is somebody I know for half a century or more. Kunal Sarkar, as I knew him in St. Xavier's School, a timid, fairly shy Xaverian who played football and cricket, studied seriously, spoke very little, an attribute which he was to make up for amply in later life. To the Kunal Sarkar in medical college, argumentative, aggressive, very serious with his studies, particularly surgical studies, and somebody who decided to debate with a passion. And I have to say, Kunal, I don't think anybody else holds the record of having won every single inter-college and inter-university debate that was on offer at that time when we teamed up together for medical college.
We did.
And then to England for his higher studies, where coincidentally, we lived part of our lives in the same city, the city of Liverpool, though pursuing two different specialties in two different hospitals. And then the return back to our hometown with hope, each one to set up his own specialty. And Kunal joined a very major cardiac surgical hospital where he spent his formative years, developed great renown as a cardiothoracic surgeon in this city, before moving on to some other hospitals until eventually he joined a major hospital on the bypass where he runs the entire department of cardiac surgery. Bypass is where he lives, and bypass is what he does for a living as well. But Kunal has contributed a lot to his specialty, that of cardiac surgery, and has risen in the Cardiological Society of India. But he always had a passion for looking at healthcare, talking about healthcare, analyzing healthcare. And that finds fruit in the book that he wrote, which he attributes to the coronavirus. In case you wonder how I know Kunal this well, we were actually just 1 year behind each other. I was 1 year behind him, both in school and medical college. So he's not as senior as his wisdom and appearance may suggest compared to me. Kunal and my association didn't end with our academic pursuits. We actually co-founded an organization called the Calcutta Debating Circle, where Kunal devoted 70% of the required time, and I was the sleeping partner most of the time. I think saying a lot more about Kunal at this stage would not be necessary, because the next hour, as we discuss about his book, you will learn a little bit about this person. Before I start off with Kunal, I also would like to welcome to this talk another cardiac surgeon, Dr. Tapas Raychaudhury, former president of this club. And Tapasda, welcome. And Tapasda is going to participate in this discussion. And we will soon have one of the doyens of medicine, Professor Shukumar Mukherjee, who will join us for the formal release of Kunal's book. So there you are, Kunal Sarkar, a heart surgeon and a debater. In his former avatar, he spends his time cutting into the matter of the heart. In his second avatar, he spends his time cutting into the heart of the matter. And Kunal, let me start off by asking you the first question, and before I hand over to Tapas for a while. And that is, I start off with one of the first quotations from your book, which I rather loved, and I'm going to read it out before I ask you to comment on it. And you write, "It is difficult to count whether I have done more debates or surgeries, but much is certain that I have pursued both with equal passion." And of course, he goes on to add a corollary to that, saying that he is very opinionated. And those of you that have read the book would certainly agree with him. Kunal Sarkar, as a debater, has either spoken fervently, feverishly, even ferociously in favor of a motion, or adamantly, assiduously against the motion. He's never sat on the wall. So Kunal, let's start off by asking you, would you agree that this book is your impression of healthcare past, present, and future, and one of the things you've not done at all is sat on the wall with your opinion?
Sandip, first of all, thank you for such a generous introduction. And first, both you and I are at a disadvantage, because unlike Tapas, who's blessed with ever youth, both of us have divulged to the people how old we are. Quite right, Sandip. I think, because look, I've been traversing this journey of healthcare, noticing things. And since, honestly, I've sort of willfully submitted myself to this profession. I don't come from a family which had either any legacy of healthcare before, or probably is unlikely to have any legacy of healthcare after. So I've noticed, I've picked up a lot of things which fascinated me to do with the history of healthcare, with the evolution of healthcare. And what really tickled provoked my little bit of the analytical self I perhaps possess, it really also taught me that all these thousands and thousands of young boys and girls who was walking this path, dedicating their minutes, hours, days, weeks, years to it, that they deserve a little bit more insight as to what is happening around them. The syllabus is very important. The syllabus of all the subjects that we travel through is very important. But at the same time, I think it was probably, if this book at all has a little bit of a contribution, it's not supposed to be a kind of a message in that way, but to give a sense of perspective, to analyze that what's happening around the fabric of healthcare, what are its strengths and weaknesses. Because unless we do so, all the labor that you and I and the succeeding generations, the young ones who are laboring day out and day in, as we see during COVID at this point of time, they also need a little bit of perspective and insight into the deficiencies of the system, the healthcare economics, the kind of mismatch that we've talked about. Yes, and I completely agree with you that I've probably not in any section, I've not really sat on the fence and tried to create neutrality where it does not exist. So I think more often than not, it's pretty sharp. One may or may not agree with some of the perspectives, but it's meant to be pretty pointed and pretty sharp.
So just now that we have all the audience joined in, I think I should take this opportunity to wish all the doctors here Happy Doctors Day, all the chartered accountants here Happy Chartered Accountancy Day, and all the rest of the audience have a great day from the Bengal Club. As I go to chapter 5 of Kunal's book, and this is the chapter which is entitled From Home to Hospital, where Kunal discusses how healthcare moved from Rabindranath Tagore having his prostate surgery in the veranda of his home to how we started actually frequenting hospitals. And I start off with a fantastic quotation. I really like the second paragraph of this chapter, and I'll read it out to the audience who may not have read it yet. And Kunal, you write, through the ages, it was natural that only, and he's writing about the history of medicine. He says, through the ages, it was natural that only the powerful and the affluent would get the services of the very few physicians and even fewer surgeons. Scattering of facilities where any kind of treatment could be done was a luxury reserved for the rich sick. A lovely phrase, rich sick. So any kind of treatment, scattering of facilities where any kind of treatment could be done was reserved for the rich sick. Kunal, nothing seems to have changed.
And Sandip, things have changed a bit. Things have moved on. And we are living through one disruption now. And if you probably read through a few more paragraphs of that chapter, you see what changed things in that era, that people never, because what was the advantage of getting into a hospital? Hardly anything. It was really the way surgical skills improved. It was really the way we learned the tricks of trade of giving intravenous fluid, doing operations. The benefits of having a clean environment, the first appearance of antisepsis in the world. So all these things put together really made an appearance that, look, it was not really that posh, or really it was not that exclusive to get treated at home. So no matter how opulent your living conditions were, you were really better served than a hospital. This is something today we take it for granted. But it took a long time in history for this to seep through, because this made an enormous amount of difference. And there were two things, there were two events in that span of history that actually made a difference. One was the French Revolution and the aftermath of Napoleon. Napoleon in the aftermath of Napoleon is always sort of portrayed to be a very dogmatic, hot-headed, short man. But the guy was pretty observant for what was happening around him. So when he saw that there was that much of sickness, that much of trauma, and some of it that doctors and surgeons could actually treat effectively, he opened up all these facilities. He opened up all these facilities for treatment. When the next time you stroll through Paris, look at the building of Our Leader. So Our Leader was really supposed to be an infirmary for the invalid. There was a time when a part of Louvre was also like an infirmary over there. And there's a chap, I think I mentioned him in the book, a chap called Courbissat. Courbissat was his principal physician. And Courbissat actually coined the term hospitals, because hospitals come from the word hospice, which was usually reserved for places you stay back, laid back kind of a place. So for a lack of a better phraseology, he used the word hospitals for these large facilities that would take in the sick people. And thereafter, a lot of changes happened post-industrial revolution, because it is the sheer necessity of large factories being worked upon by healthy, able-bodied workforce that we felt the necessity that, look, treating these people as in small individual clusters were not enough. We need to have large facilities, clean environment, antiseptic wards where we could carry on. And your and my trade, surgery, had a lot to do with it. The clever chap who was Napoleon's principal surgeon, he was supposed to be the quickest surgeon in the world. And he was so quick that whenever he did an amputation, that was the commonest surgery performed in that era, he always chopped off 3 fingers of the assistant. He used to chop off a hand and a leg and a few fingers of the assistant. So a lot happened, a lot of transformation happened. And you had all this rivalry, across the English Channel between the British and the French. So what Napoleon was doing, all the practices he was adapting at that time, the British always had an eye on it, and they would sort of try to do the same in their practice as well. So it took a long time coming. It took a long time coming because to the aristocrats and the nobility, it made no sense for thousands of years. It made no sense to go to a treatment facility to get treated. Treatment facilities were almost, viewed like a home for destitutes. You never went there out of choice. You only went there. To get to a hospital was actually an announcement was an admission of the fact that you were not posh enough. You were not high enough in the social circles. So you are going to so-and-so infirmary, so-and-so. It's like visiting a home for a destitute to get treated. It took some time coming, but what we take for granted today wasn't that automatic in that era.
You talk about Napoleon, Kunal. I think Napoleon has gone on record saying that he never trusted any of his doctors. Is that correct?
Well, he didn't. Probably he didn't for himself. He didn't for himself. But Napoleon, when he makes a comeback following the first leg of the French Revolution, he went into exile because repeatedly he would go into exile and come back. But when he came back from exile, he realized the importance of maintaining a small, tight, effective, healthy army. So France was, very, very, it's almost like Indian politics of today. There were that many compartments emerging. So he had to keep his trusted band of followers, his generals, his lieutenants, or whatever he called them. He had to. So he realized the value of keeping them, in a sort of a road-worthy condition at that point of time.
Okay, let's leave France for the moment. The French have anyway been eliminated. Let's talk about your chapter 8 of your book, where you write, "It all started here." Calcutta Medical College, though I would have an argument with you about saying Calcutta Medical College, but Tapas knows there was never such a college. It was the medical college in Bengal. However, would you like to share with the audience, not all of whom have had the opportunity to go through the precincts of this institution, what was the contribution of Medical College Kolkata to the healthcare in this city?
See, it's a fascinating phase of history. We are talking about the 1830s now. You see, by the 1830s, the sort of first leg of the Bengal Renaissance has already taken place. And you have people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Vidyasagar, etc., who are now sort of intellectual celebrities from our homegrown intellectual celebrities. So you're not only dependent on the Hares and the William Joneses. Now, what happens at that time was, if you consider Calcutta, you all know very well that Calcutta was the sort of hub of the second city of the British Empire. Calcutta was not just the capital of British India. Calcutta was very much the commercial capital, from where the whole of the East India companies, Eastern outfits. Because look, by this time, the Sepoy Mutiny has not yet happened. Sepoy Mutiny is 1857. So at that time, Calcutta, what did we have by way of health facilities? Some of you, I'm sure you know where All India Radio was. So All India Radio used to have an older outfit, a little bit more tucked towards the north, in a place called the Gurston Place. So the Gurston Place is the first place which had any kind of a hospital in Calcutta. This was, I think, late 1700s. And that is where the first PG hospital came up. It was PG. What does PG stand for? PG stands for Presidency and General Hospital. They're a small place. About 30 or 50 people could be treated there. None of the natives could ever go in. So it was meant for either the sort of high functionary, the people of the military outfit of the East India Company. So from there, PG Hospital has been to many locations. So from there, for a brief period of time, PG Hospital moves over to a little place which was inside Fort William. not too far away from where you had the infamous Black Hole of Calcutta. Black Hole of Calcutta happened much before that. It happened just before the War of Plassey. But inside Fort William, you had PG Hospital for some time. But then, they were bringing more and more people, more and more officials, more and more the army, the military strength of East India Company was increasing. So that was not enough. So if that was not enough, where does PG Hospital then shift? PG Hospital then shifts to a garden house of a Protestant priest. And the garden house of the Protestant priest is where the current campus is. I think the fellow was called Reverend Carnarvon, and that was his garden house over there, a very, I think, a princely kind of place. So whether he gave it voluntarily or whether they just usurped it out of him, God only knows. So PG Hospital goes to its third place, to the Circular Road. Now, what was Circular Road? Remember, Circular Road was not a road. Circular Road was a ditch, because that is the ditch that was dug around Calcutta. That was like the perimeter of Calcutta, because that was a ditch that was dug to protect us from the Maratha raids. So Marathas were coming in from the west, so that was a ditch that was dug up to protect Calcutta from the Marathas. So we have PG Hospital, which settles in this place, but we have to remember that there was no education there. There was no teaching, there was no training, there was nothing. You only had a set of doctors. Almost all of them were British, supported by certain paramedical assistants and all that. Now, where were the paramedical assistants trained? There were three places in Calcutta. One was called the Ayurveda Hospital, where Madhusudan Gupta comes from. Then you had a Unani outfit, and then you have a fever hospital, where all the infections, it was very common. You had epidemics 3-4 times a year. But the British were absolutely clear that they did not want any full-fledged medical education in India, period. Then there was a lot of activism, like the social media of today, like your Facebook and YouTube of today, and the YouTubers and the Facebook activists of that generation were mainly spearheaded by two people. One was Ram Mohan Rai and the other was Vidyasagar. So Ram Mohan Rai and Vidyasagar take a great exception to the fact. They questioned William Bentinck. There were multiple meetings with Lord Bentinck. So William Bentinck, who was the then Governor General, they really, accused him that, look, you've been here long enough, from 1757, you are well into 80 years of your occupation of India, and you refuse to give us a medical college. Now, just prior to that, when the Portuguese came here, the Portuguese, all these colonial people, they used to run small ramshackle training outfits. The Portuguese ran a kind of condensed course in medicine from ships. They never had a permanent college. Similarly, the French used to run a similar sort of short-term, 7 days to medicine kind of course from unpronounceable French name, École de Residence, something it was called. That is exactly where JIPMER stands today in Pondicherry. But to cut a long story short, none of them were a full-fledged, recognized medical college. So this group of people, led by Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, it was a big group. They make multiple representations to the governor, to William Bentinck, and Bentinck was not a bad fellow. Bentinck gave them a compassionate hearing, and it took quite a few meetings. I think there were 7 or 8 meetings or something. Then finally, they succumbed to the will of the people, the Bengali intelligentsia, the Bengal Renaissance of that era, that they said, fair enough, you deserve a medical college. So a proper medical college was set up. Now, the first classes that we know of in the January of 1836 did not happen in the current place, 88 College Street. So the next time you go to coffee house to have a cup of coffee, you remember it is the building of the coffee house which was an estate of a family called the Sens. Sukumar Sen, I think the family was called. So he gave up a part of the building for the first classes of medical college to be held. And I think it stayed in that building for a good part of a year. Then it moved on to the campus, the present campus, College Street. And thereafter, a year after that, Motilal got convinced that it's making sense. And Motilal Sheel, who was a rich businessman, Motilal Sheel did not donate the land for the college. Motilal Sheel donated the land on which we have MCH, the Central Hospital Building. So Motilal Sheel actually donates the land for MCH, on which the MCH hospital came. So 1836 was the first medical college of Asia in the form of, as you say, Medical College Bengal or Calcutta Medical College, that it came to be known kind of euphemistically, Medical College Bengal. But politics, there was a political undercurrent to the fact, because remember, much before Calcutta became a hub of the British were actually running most of their operations from Madras, Chennai. Chennai actually had a hospital almost 100 years before Medical College Calcutta, but there was no teaching over there. So then I think that was called the Madras General Hospital. Then a few months after Calcutta Medical College, that gets converted to the second Medical College of India. Then you have King Edward Medical College in Mumbai. So, if not exactly in 88 College Street, but in Calcutta, the British were kind of coerced by the Bengal Renaissance intelligentsia of that era to give in to the demand and have the first medical college. It took a lot. There are minutes of there are records of meetings and all that. It did not come so simply. And just a small note, Sandip, is that we have the medical college in 1836, but there wasn't a word uttered about nursing. Everything happened the wrong way around. There wasn't a word uttered about nurses training till we have Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. And the person who realized the need to have nurses training in this part was actually Florence Nightingale. So Florence Nightingale, who by that time was very famous after the Crimean War. So Florence Nightingale, she headed the committee that starts nursing training a good 20 years after medical college had come over. So there was a lot of strong public opinion, and it was good. I think if not for William Bentinck, we would not have got it in 1836. They were very reluctant to have a medical college.
Very, very interesting facets of history in your book, a lot of which you just talked about. But I think we'll come to something closer to your heart. Let's talk about your subject, cardiology and cardiothoracic surgery. I'm going to get Dr. Tapas Raychaudhury in on this, being birds of the same feather. Tapas, you've read the book and you've read about Kunal's opinion or assessment of the growth of the specialty of cardiology and cardiothoracic surgery in this country. What are your comments about that?
I think he more or less covered the subject well. You see what happens, the cardiac surgery itself, when it started in Vellore as well as in KM Hospital in Bombay, and they changed everything, but the quality was really gone up once the All India Institute of Medical Science started, and they have started a department, and people got formal structured training. So he has more or less covered the way it progressed. But I think important part was that there was many patients that died without having a surgery when there was a need for surgery. Now that spread actually took place because of several other quality institutions developed in many parts of India, like other All India Institute Medical Sciences, PGI Chandigarh, and then in each city there are several quality hospitals with quality cardiac care. Now, of course, it's all changed when angioplasty came in. We could see that it's going to make a change in as early as in 1989 when the first angioplasty slide was shown to us in, at that time, I think I was in Manchester. Maybe another 10 years, 5, 6, 7 years time. By the time I was in Calcutta in 1996, 97, Ashok Dhar did the first angioplasty. And then things gradually change all over the world. So the thing is that the coronary artery disease is the bulk of the cardiac disease or burden for the last 30, 40 years. Before that, it was rheumatic heart disease. Now, one of the disease, the rheumatic heart disease, I must admit and give credit to the several governments as well as the public health infrastructure, that gradually by itself disappeared. Rheumatic fever itself disappeared because of the basic improvement in the hygienic condition, and the way people came to know about it by the doctors. So the burden then become actually the blockages in the various blood vessels, whether it's a brain, heart, or kidney. But thing is that what the point I'd like to ask Kunal also, that what is thought about this, that in India, it involves the people from all strata of society, because we are not only a coronary artery diseases of capital of world, but also the diabetic capital of the world. So and they go hand by hand. And so what happens as the diabetes is 65 to 70% of ordinary average population. So actually, it's not surprising that nearly 50% of people from any strata of society in some time or other, maybe early, maybe mid or end part of their life, they're going to suffer from some type of vascular blockages, mostly in the heart, but it happens in the kidney, in brain. So it's a vascular disease is going to be important. And I think the angioplasty, fortunately, is spreading like a wildfire, and probably can take care of that. But problem is, it is expensive. And I just asked, Kunal has in several of his later chapters, he talked about the medicine and the cost and funding. And so since I was asked about the cardiac disease or coronary or blockages of blood vessel disease, how Kunal thinks in two questions for him. So how these things is going to be dealt with financially, the burden, financial burden of, let's say, angioplasty, that's going to be maybe 10 years time curing most of the blockages and the vascular disease. And secondly, the staff, particularly the ancillary staff, the nurses and the technicians, as things become more technologically rich, we need more of them, and how those that problem is going to be solved.
Before we go to that, Tapas, I'm going to first argue with you that I think there's a great deal of difference between arteries of the brain and arteries of the heart. And something that's troubled me all my life, because, you know, people who have narrow heart arteries have fat wallets. Those who have narrow brain arteries necessarily do not have fat wallets. So that's why there's much more money in cardiac and in neurosurgery. I'm going to ask Kunal, before he takes up your challenging questions, why cardiac surgery? What made you choose cardiac surgery? Because you remember when you and I were in medical college, the cardiothoracic department would spend a lot of time doing open heart surgeries on dogs. And every morning we used to go and check whether the dogs were alive. This was before their successors and the next generation would be subject to dialysis in other hospitals. This was done with formal permission and formally. So Kunal, what made you choose heart surgery?
I'd actually gone to England very adamant and very stubborn that I'm going to be a plastic surgeon. Because after general surgery in Calcutta, our postgraduate entrance was being delayed. So I did plastic surgery for almost a year, with the great, charismatic surgeon, Dr. Amit Ganguly. And I never saw any surgical personality beyond him. And I was absolutely adamant, and after having got through the exams that we were supposed to, I actually refused quite a few jobs, being absolutely intent. And I got a North of England plastic surgery rotation. But the sort of delusion that we were in, because the kind of plastic surgery we saw for a year with Dr. Amit Ganguly was mostly to do with orofacial cancer and cleft lip and palate. And we were fairly adept in doing those things. But the kind of plastic surgery, I gave a hand and an arm and a leg to get a plastic surgery job in the Leeds rotation, Leeds Middlesbrough rotation in England. And then I saw that this is not the plastic surgery we ever saw. They were very minute, they were very fidgety, they were very good. They were either to do with, making bent noses straight or flat noses up, or, adding a little bit more to the breast or taking a little bit away from the breast. So that was kind of an entire day's surgery was about. So that was kind of, tending to cheese me off. And the actual culprit who actually got me and brainwashed me into cardiac surgery is still alive. He's an anesthetist, Dr. Guho, who used to do local anesthesia in the hospital I used to work in. And that was the time when 1991, that the word was around that Tapas was, I think, probably started operating in Kolkata. He was probably back from Australia in that era, that Mbbs hospital was coming up. They were getting a team. So there was a kind of buzz in the air. And this guy somewhat, brainwashed me that, this is an area where not many people have gone before, and so on and so forth. And probably it was either, it has two definitions, either a leap of faith or a folly of ignorance. So it was like blind leading the blind, I went for it. But, that die has been cast a long time back. But I think what is of real interest of cardiac surgery in healthcare in India actually is that if you look, I'm not trying to take away from all this razzmatazz of Atmanirbhar Bharat and etc., forget about it. Where we belong in the technological tier of the world, Indian healthcare is a good few notches above the other kind of comparable technologies we have in this country. What made us have a superior healthcare, say to a Bangladesh, a Pakistan, a Sri Lanka? How come that today we have to beg and borrow in the world for to have a sophisticated jet engine technology? We are still today for you can have an IIT in every traffic signal, but still you don't have a hope in hell of manufacturing a passenger jet aircraft for the next 10 years. Jet technology is almost 60, 70 years of age today. So compared to our skill set, either in manufacturing or even in software or in kind of heavy metals and metallurgy, suddenly Indian healthcare takes a few leaps forward and we actually develop expertise, whether it is in the heart, whether it is in the brain, whether it is in orthopedics and critical care, where the peak of the expertise in some select institutes compare with comparable technologies elsewhere in the world. How does that happen? It did not happen in any other applied technology domain in India, as far as to the best of my knowledge. And that happened. That kind of push, that kind of thrust came in the mid-70s because it was catalyzed. It was catalyzed by a few events. And I tried to earmark some of the events. And one such event happened in 1975, when in a very non-pretentious place, the railway hospital Perambur, railway hospital in Perambur, the enigmatic Dr. K.M. Cherian, who's still alive, suddenly comes out of the blue and does a first coronary bypass. Then subsequently, a lot of people take it on. The spurt of medical technology, which essentially happened because in the mid-70s and in the early 80s, there were actually people who had trained and learned the craft elsewhere, that they persevered, they stayed back in India, got affiliated with institutions where they could reproduce that work. And in the same course of time, as Tapas was saying, through various programs, then programs like CMC Velour, etc., increased. And it was both practicing your skill set and training people who could keep up the legacy after you. Because there is simply no way that if you look at our socio-economic league table of India, we should have been in the same level as any affluent North African country. What about the healthcare standard of Kenya? What about the healthcare standards of Nigeria? What about the healthcare standards of Middle East? The entire, they have money dripping from their eyes and noses, but still the intrinsic healthcare knowledge base and expertise is absolutely infantile. Even if they need one specialty being set up today, whether it is Abu Dhabi, whether it is Dubai, whether it is Bahrain, they will immediately look outwards and get some, expert from elsewhere and do it. And even in the hospitals they've set up today, a good few years after Indian flagship institutes came up, they are still not today of the comparable standard. So we had very humble beginnings. The humble beginnings started in Railway Hospital Perambur, in Christian Medical College Vellore. Some good work was done in Calcutta, in the vascular units of SSKM Hospital. And then in the mid-80s, in 1983, you have Dr. Pratap Reddy. He really burst into the scene with the first non-CSR, truly out-and-out corporate hospital of India. The chain, the way we mean a corporate hospital, Apollo came. So, not because I happen to be a cardiac surgeon, because then there was a downstream effect of this thing. So all these each and every corporate hospital that came up was all pivoted around the cardiac practice. Apollo Chennai, Apollo Hyderabad, Fortis Delhi, BM Birla Kolkata, all of them were pivoted around because, as Tapas said, we have a lot of heart disease. You were getting heart patients dime a dozen. You had trained people who were doing a good job. And that really catalyzed the expertise upsurge in India. Because that is, I find that very strange. If I look around me and compare the standards of healthcare in India, standards of healthcare expertise, it's not uniform. There are tremendous problems with distribution, as I have written extensively in the book.
Kunal, I'm going to interrupt you here and take you up on something you talked about, corporate hospitals. You write in your book, and I quote again.
Now, Sandip, just before leaving this subject Kunal was talking about, I just want to mention and also want to have his view, as I mentioned, that there is no secret that, results of, say, for example, bypass surgery done by Kunal or done by my team is anyway inferior than is done in Guy's Hospital, probably better. But the improvement in Indian healthcare is really more happened in tertiary care. If you look to the primary healthcare in the social sector, probably the part vaccination, but the general infantile care, infant mortality rate, if you compare that to the Western world, then we really lag behind in a big way. So I think I agree with Kunal that we have made a actually much a rapid progress in tertiary healthcare, no doubt about that. But that's not necessarily true for primary healthcare or even secondary healthcare.
That's a point is very well taken. You know, that's why when we dwell on rural healthcare, 1943 Board Committee, and there are 10 contributed sections in the book, wonderful chapters, which are written by my friends, and one of them written by Swati Bhattacharya, you know, who better than her knows about the ins and outs of rural healthcare in India. So I absolutely buy, you know, similarly, because I'm just talking about the peak levels of technology. The peak levels of technology that we have achieved in 7 decades in healthcare has really not been replicated in other comparable areas in India. It hasn't. It really hasn't. And this was all due to the retention of expertise that happened in the mid-70s and early 80s. We were able to retain the talent and train people. That is why it happened.
Kunal, no, Tapas, at that point we made before, we said that still the disease of the rich sick is well looked after in the country, something that I said hasn't changed from the medieval times. So that point we talked about before. But I was just going to, we have to get into something controversial before we let Kunal away, because we have to let him use his debating prowess as well. So I'm going to talk to him about his comments about corporate hospitals, where he says corporate hospitals are viewed both in respect and disdain. And I'm going to ask him which he thinks is more, respect or disdain. I mean, he is very clearly opinionated on this as well. So which one do you think is more, the respect or the disdain currently?
Well, you know, corporate hospitals definitely have earned a lot of respect simply because they have given facilities which are plush, facilities which have good sort of comfort values, which have good doctors, which are well provided for in terms of medical technology, and most of them, you know, whether you are doing heart, orthopedics, critical care, etc. So they are generally staffed with good level of expertise. But where corporate hospitals in India, you see the basic. If you, I think I have used this kind of comparison more than once. That the whole saga about selling medicine in India is a little bit like selling water in a desert. There is a huge demand for water in a desert, but the problem is not with demand. You know, it belies expectation for us to realize that in India, so underprovided for in healthcare, that you actually have to go out and peddle healthcare. You have to market healthcare. You have to do push sales about healthcare. That we need the kind of brand advertising we do in healthcare. So I think there, you know, the corporate hospitals gave into 2 things. One is they were constantly playing in a game of moving goalposts. That is something that I refer to in the chapter on policy, because you never had consistency on what the healthcare policy in India is going to be for the next 2 to 3 years. You know, you and I today live in a 10-story building, of which the bottom 5 stories are Cuba and the upper 5 stories is America. And we keep on vacillating repeatedly that are we going for a government-funded, cost-equated universal healthcare, or are we going to be insurance providers that invites more private sector capital? Right now, you know, where we are placed today, there is complete schizophrenia in healthcare policy. The Niti Aayog thinks that you're going in for the private policy PPP model. There are 10 states of India led by West Bengal who thinks that they are going to drive hard the government paid for low-cost health schemes. And because there isn't consistency in policy, that reflected the way the corporate sector functions. And it makes, you know, because the corporate sector has catered well to that 4% who have healthcare insurance. They have catered well to the 2% who do not mind, you know, paying a few bobs out of their pocket. But the more they flourish, this is a point I make in the chapter on nursing homes. I've written quite extensively on nursing homes. And because the nursing homes did a great job. But because they were addressing a scarcity situation by looking away from the segment of the people who needed it the most, the more you did, the more you separated yourself from the huge mass of population who needed you badly. So in some ways, I'm not playing a victim card. In some ways, corporate hospitals, I still think corporate hospitals are sort of, they're a little bit like the Volvo cars of, say, 1980s and 1990s. If you ever had a Volvo car in the 1980s, then 50% of their horsepower would just be spent on moving the car, not on moving the passengers. So still today, corporate healthcare is too top heavy. The manpower.
Sandip, can I ask a question to Kunal regarding this corporate hospital and insurance? Kunal, you know that two major corporate hospital chains, they tried their own health insurance scheme, and which makes sense because you run a big insurance scheme and people contribute to it. And from that, they pay when you are admitted or get treated. But why this, I know for sure about the 40s, but Apple also started, but why this is not taken up as compared to?
Suppose it will never succeed because, it depends upon the peak level of insurance you are going to pay. Because smaller the base of the pyramid, higher is going to be the height of the premium, right? So for a corporate group like Apollo, the biggest healthcare chain in India today, they're around 11, 12,000 beds. Number two right now is Manipal. After their acquisition of Columbia Asia, they also have, they're not 10,000 yet, they're nearly 10,000 beds. But anyway, whatever it is, it was probably a clever plan, but you're never going to have a base which is wide enough and broad enough to give you an insurance level that can compete, say, with a Star Insurance or a national insurance. You will never be able to compete. Because as it is, you see,
but they also do not seem to seen promoting the general insurance to the people.
Health insurance is a total loss-making business. I've made the thing in my chapter on health insurance.
Yes, you did.
It's a dead loss. Health insurance, if you earn 10 rupees in premium in health insurance, a insurance company ends up paying about 15 rupees in payouts. So how does a health insurance survive? Health insurance survives because of your motor car insurance, because of the non-health products they have, life insurance, etc., etc. And health insurance only came in somewhere in the late 80s because Rajiv Gandhi insisted. It was only Rajiv Gandhi's insistence. He bet his life on the fact that, look, I need to have health insurance in India. You look at Bangladesh today, there isn't a single health insurance product in comparable economies. Bangladesh's per capita GDP is now higher than ours. They don't have a single health insurance product there. Pakistan today per capita GDP is not too far away from India. If you look at the total aggregate GDP, it is different. Pakistan does not even have a single health insurance product over there. So health insurance per se is not viable in India today, but somehow they are struggling and they're cross-subsidizing from other products.
Okay, Kunal, on this note, I think we have the opportunity to welcome Professor Sukumar Mukherjee into the program. Thank you, sir, for being able to join us. I know you had a very, very busy day, and I saw you very busy all afternoon and early evening. So thank you for joining us. And on that note, I'm talking about insurance, Kunal, I'm going to ask you about the so-called government insurance programs, which a lot of our members have a lot of questions about, whether it's the central government's insurance schemes or the state government Shati scheme. Do you think all these schemes are really designed to make sure that the health sector remains an island of socialism in an otherwise sea of capitalism that this country is bathed in?
Absolutely. I think I don't have a better summary than what you have just said. Because what we have, we don't really have socialism. What we have today is essentially populism. So this is populism, and this kind of economics that happens in some of the southern Indian states and Bengal at the moment. This is the model that Eva Peron practiced in Argentina. The great song, "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." So if you remember Eva Peron and Argentina. So populism has happened in different places. And what we have in healthcare for people in the audience who do not come from the healthcare sector is like telling Samsung company that, look, every Indian needs a cell phone. So from tomorrow morning, I stipulate you that you are going to sell a Galaxy Note 10 or something for 10,000 rupees, simply because irrespective of the input costs, irrespective of the manpower costs, that is what the population needs. Now, this is exactly what is happening in healthcare, that a lot of uncalculated. Now, the problem is why? Why does that happen? Because you see the committees who get together, the high priests who get together and formulate these costs, they haven't really been in a threatening distance. In a threatening distance of either running a hospital or having a, they are completely undisturbed in their inexperience, right? No one has got the foggiest idea of what input costs in real life healthcare is. People tell me that, look, government hospital care is free of cost. Obviously it is. And that is why you're paying 100 rupees per liter on 30 rupees petrol. So there is no free lunch in the world today. One form of healthcare is funded by the taxpayer, and the government hospitals don't really have cash counters. The cash counters are across the road in the 200 medicine shops. Why does each government hospital need 200 medicine shops align the streets opposite to it? It's like a bridesmaid to a bride. We have taken it for granted. Who needs 200 medicine shops selling the same antibiotics? Who needs it? What for? And when these medicine shops goes on their back-scratching business pattern, etc., you will do some investigative journalism on some doctor and come up with the fact that, you are taking 10 rupees from a medicine shop, 50 rupees from a diagnostic clinic. Who ever asked for that in one area of South Calcutta, you're going to have 100 clinics testing the same hemoglobin? What does that add value to the hemoglobin level of a single patient? So we wanted this unregulated fish market as far as the retail is concerned, because that is cheap business. Setting up comes dreadfully cheap. Today, an average boy or girl, I've spoken to so many of them, they think that having the same paracetamol available in 200 successive shops is what it should be in medical retail. Of course not. Your petrol pump is regulated. Then by the same logic, you should have had a petrol pump every 50 yards. So if your petrol is regulated, your Indian gas is regulated, how come medicines are selling willy-nilly right, left, and center? From a condom to a cancer drug, you can go and buy anything across the counter. And who takes the blame for it? When you pick up the funny stories here and there, the blame comes to the doctor. We are the foot soldiers. We did not devise this theater of the absurd. We have become so used to it. This has become ingrained in the DNA of our system that we think this is the practice. And similarly, what you say with corporate hospitals today is corporate hospitals, are faced with inconsistency in policy. They don't have a foggiest idea what the policy of June 2021 may not be the same as policy of December 2021. You haven't got the foggiest clue how your taxation structure, what insurance, the populism is thrust down the throat of government or private hospitals. It does not meet their cost structures at all. That is one problem. And the corporate hospitals being trapped into this, what they are compelled to do today, this really looks grotesque. Can you ever imagine a country which has half the number of hospital beds that it actually deserves? You have thousands and thousands of people who have to go out in the periphery and market hospitals. I find this completely mathematically incongruous. Why should this happen?
Kunal, we're running out of time. So while you're talking about marketing, I'm going to get into one of your slightly controversial chapters whose title is self-explanatory, which is Toxic Advertising, and seek a very quick opinion about advertising in medicine and healthcare.
Well, I think, advertising in medicine in its different forms, we are all, we cannot pretend to be holier than thou, driven by necessities. Those of us, people who are in the government sector, who stand close to politicians, their advertising comes for free. And that is a proximity with the center of power. And those who are left alone to fend for itself in the corporate sector, they have a tough job in their hands because they are trying to sell high cost, high end, high quality products to a very limited segment of the population. And one evil begets the other because you have both cannot be congruous. We cannot say that we need twice the number of hospital beds and at the same time forget about COVID. In a non-COVID situation, the average occupancy of a busy private hospital is around 70-75%, around 70%. So there is actually quite a lot of spare capacity. So the point we are trying to make over here is healthcare capacity is healthcare capacity. We have to develop a breadth of vision and look beyond the compartmentalization of what is private and what is public and ensure someone somewhere has to have that breadth of vision so that the capacity is used wisely to its credit. I have repeatedly given the example of Germany, the only country that faced up to COVID with adequate infrastructure was Germany. Not only it treated its own patients, it took patients in from Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Belgium, and all these places. And Germany, which has the most number of critical care beds and number of hospitals, the government controls and synchronizes healthcare. The government does not own a single hospital. It is a nationally coordinated healthcare system where government is not in the business of owning hospitals. It happens in Germany, it happens in South Korea, it happens in different parts of the world. That is an overview I try to give in the chapter on different systems of healthcare. Because this kind of hodgepodge that we are going through at this point of time, both people at both ends up being unhappy. You are unhappy in a government hospital because it doesn't look smart, it doesn't look clean, it is overcrowded, it is cluttered. You are not happy entirely in the private sector, because you are paying through your nose, your cost has gone above the insurance limits. So all the hard work, all the tremendous amount of clinical results that are being achieved today, that is the purpose of that is not to brew discontent. That's the point.
No, I think one of the things I have to appreciate about the book is how bold you've been to call a spade a spade. And I particularly talk about your reference to the display of the theater of the absurd and what followed the events of 21st February 2017, the details of which this audience may not be familiar with. But I was going to ask you about this theater of the absurd that you talk about, and how do you think it has impacted doctor-patient relationship in this city and state?
I think, it was definitely not required. It was definitely not required. I think you're referring to the town hall incident, isn't it? So the 21st February 2017, you see, we have deficiencies, we have problems. We have problems with financial affordability. We have problems with patient counseling. And as I just said, the tragedy of the situation is so much good work, so much high quality work at both ends. Look at, cannot go on generating more and more discontent. That cannot be the purpose of why the combined healthcare sector exists. So on that day, 21st of February 2017, the public show of reprimand to the corporate hospitals, I am sure it did not go down well. It did not go down with the corporate sector because, mind you, see, West Bengal, you realize, is a little bit atypical. West Bengal is atypical because we are the only state in the entire country. Out of 30 states of India, we are the only major state where capacity in the government sector is not just more than the capacity of private sector, it is double. It is double the number of beds. In all other states of India, the private sector, in Karnataka, the private sector is 3 times bigger than the public sector. In Punjab, you don't have a government sector in healthcare. India, the granary of India, you don't have. Punjab, the government hospitals are pathetic. That is why they have 6% official COVID mortality. It does not exist. Tamil Nadu, even Kerala, mind you, contrary to popular belief, if you read the chapter on healthcare in God's own country, Kerala is actually a network of lot of charity hospitals, a lot of them Christian missionary hospitals. Kerala does not have a strong network of either government hospitals, and Kerala, with the best social indices of India, does not have a single major corporate. There is no Apollo, no Fortis, no Max, nothing in Kerala. And yet they have the strongest healthcare indices of entire India. Now, coming back to your question, that it did not go down well at all. And a little bit of damage limitation, one of the few things, you'll be kind of half grateful to the virus for, is this onslaught of the first wave and second wave. And the way the entire capacity of healthcare was overwhelmed. And I honestly appreciate the second part of it, the way the government of Bengal reached out to the private healthcare, the way they tried to synchronize, to use the capacities of private healthcare. It was not perfect, but I tell you something, the results were good, and the approach made to private healthcare during COVID was sincere. But whoever advised, whoever engineered that event, where, like if you remember our Monday whipping caning at the hand of Father Boucher in St. Xavier's, that you all had the private sector hospitals lined up to get a reprimand from the chief ministers of the state, that was definitely best awarded. It made no sense to anybody, least of all to me.
One final question, Kunal, before we ask Professor Mukherjee to formally inaugurate your book and release it. And that is this. You mentioned in your discussion and your talk that on the one hand, we have doctors in government hospitals who are subservient to the desires, the whims and fancies of their political bosses, and whose actual work environment, even the city where they would work, depends on their political allegiance and the ability to pay due respect to their political bosses. On the other hand, we have the corporate sector, where, as you say, sometimes the control is mainly on business motives, where the motives today and the motives tomorrow, the modus operandi today and tomorrow change. So what is the future on Doctors' Day? This is the last question I'm going to ask you. What's the future of people entering the profession? Either they have to go and become government doctors subservient to their political bosses, or they become corporate sector doctors subservient to their business heads.
Sandip, if you look for I don't think there is a magic bullet solution to this problem. But if you look at the economic scale, you see all this talk about $5 trillion economy and all that has gone, it has been flushed down the drain. It's down the toilet. In my and your lifetime, it's extremely unlikely we'll get anywhere near that figure. So we are going to be a kind of struggling, crawling, developing economy for the next decade. what COVID has done to us. And in that format, I think there has to be a kind of halfway house between the unaffordable corporate sector of today and underprovided government sector of today, so that we can come forward and give some meaningful, accessible healthcare. What does the government do? Does the government become infrastructure providers, or the government become insurance providers? Now that is something the government has to decide. It has to make its mind up. Going by the weather, you cannot have a fluctuating set of policies, every 15 days. And one fundamental point is, you see, health is a subject in the state list in India, but all the overarching policies are made in the center. So in fact, there is a whisper going around that probably if not for COVID, this amendment to the Constitution would already have been made, that I think in the very near future, health will be moved back to the concurrent list. Because otherwise, you see this business where central government wants Ayushman and state government wants Swasthya, that today state government is able to override that at the great political disadvantage of the central government. So, a central government with aspirations is not going to sit like a sitting duck and let it happen. So how the state governments will resist it is a matter for time to tell. But the other, before we wind up, one other very important point I want to make is two. One is that please be very careful of the fact we are overproducing doctors today. 70,000 doctors being produced every year with the healthcare infrastructure remaining static. We are producing doctors as a per capita of population. That is a mistake. A doctor requires an infrastructure to work in. Gone are those days when a doctor is expected to sit in some lonely medicine shop with some, 50-watt bulb above his head, and you say every unemployed doctor is considered to be in private practice. There are only 20% of doctors who are in kind of any predictable salary scale employment. The rest of all of them live from hand to mouth. And with the infrastructure of India remaining static at that 18 to 20 lakhs bed for the whole country, and it has remained static for the last half a decade, it is not shifting. You are building a big glitzy corporate hospital on one side, and about 5 nursing homes are winding up from the other, or the other way around. So I think that is a dangerous exercise. And in terms of medical education, if we are really intent on producing more and more doctors, the state has to contribute to medical education. We cannot allow 65% of the medical graduates to come into the system which has a large financial debt hanging on their heads. I think this is completely incongruous with the socio-economic, Sandip, the time when you and I don't know Tapas das time, in your and my time, we spent 5 years in medical college, 100 rupees we were supposed to pay. We used to pay 25, 30 rupees because of scholarship and all those things. And look at today's position. Today, if a humble person who's like a middle grade employee in a bank wants his son or her daughter to become a doctor with Mbbs and postgraduate, look at the amount of indebtedness the person has got to go through today with 65% of it. We are not talking about 10%, 15%, 20%. We are talking about 65%. So I think that is very important, because otherwise, if these young boys and girls are starting their lives, we are not Europe, we are not North America, we are not England, where it is taken for granted that somebody starts their professional life with a big loan which they are going to pay off in a low interest basis for 15 years. That repayment mechanism does not exist in India.
Kunal, last question. This is a yes or no answer. If today you had a choice whether you wanted to become a doctor or not, would you choose it or not?
Well, you know, a lot of the choice of profession, the short
No, it
answer
has to be a yes or no.
no, the short answer to the question is yes. I would still want to become a doctor because there were experiences in my adolescence, which I come from a family of technocrats, which there were a set of experiences very disruptive in my late adolescence, which completely cheesed me off from the nuts and bolt world. I just subconsciously looked the other way. I would still want to be a doctor, but I would want to be a doctor who not only mugs up his syllabus, but is also aware of the perspective, the reality, the coordinates of the reality in which we function today. Because today's boys and girls, today's youngsters are at least 5 times cleverer than I am, and they deserve better. We need to create a situation, we need to create a circumstances where these 70,000 clever young boys and girls of India today is going to have a meaningful and fruitful career for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, Kunal. I think I was just worried you'd say no and Professor Shukumar Mukherjee would leave this meeting, but thank you for saying yes. Because sir will
How
then
could we
carry
say
on.
that?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Last comment, yes, I would like to bring Professor Shukumar Mukherjee in. I don't think Professor Shukumar Mukherjee needs an introduction to the audience. His introduction is that he's been both Kunal and my teacher in medical college, and he continues to remain a teacher for many, many generations. We're going to get Professor Shukumar Mukherjee in for a very brief comment about the book before we ask him to really cut the ribbon and release this book. Sir.
Okay, good evening. Let me introduce myself. I was listening the whole discussion with rapt attention. I too like to say this. I am fortunate to work both in the government sector and the private sector. 32 years in government service and about 30 years in private service. There is an overlap of about 6 or 7 years. So I have seen both ends together. So I am in the crossroads, past and present, crossroads of public health and on private health. I think scenario before 1980 was different than scenario after 1980. Where the 1980 before, the healthcare system depends on the doctor itself. But after 1980, after the admission of the private care center, the treatment is no longer resting on the doctor alone, but a team of people. Doctor is one of the phenomena. And it has been surrounded by public hospital, private hospital, huge population with poverty, and they are underprivileged, and availability of technology is not homogeneous, it is heterogeneous in the different parts of the districts of West Bengal or India. So obviously picture is all the more not the same one as it was before 1980. So in an inauguration ceremony, I think it is customary to introduce Dr. Kunal Sarkar, for which I am very proud of it. I must say something about the Kunal because he belongs to the same alma mater where I am there, and also Dr. Chatterjee. Sandip Chatterjee is also there. So obviously it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Kunal Sarkar on this inauguration of the special book on which has got lot of enthusiasm, lot of controversies, lot of incisive dissection, and some solution, and some still left for the future to occur. Dr. Kunal Sarkar, born in Kolkata and a graduate of Medical College, has a checkered career all through. He is a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh and Glasgow and member of the National Board of Examination. In his illustrious journey, he has received many accolades with 11 medals, including one gold medal during the golden days of graduation. One of the leading cardiac surgeons of India with a special interest in coronary bypass surgery and complex adult cardiac operation, both in this country and 10-year stay in UK. He is currently Senior Vice Chairman and Chief Cardiac Surgeon of Medical Super Speciality Hospital, Calcutta, and Chairman of the Kolkata Heart Foundation. He was the vice president and chief cardiac surgeon between 2001 to 2012 in R.N. Tagore International Institute of Cardiac Science, which is a brainchild of Dr. Devi Shetty. He was also president of Indian Association of Cardiothoracic Surgeons, and along with Dr. Devi Shetty, he is responsible for major cardiac program in India. With lifelong interest in various debates and socio-economic discussion, he has shown his brilliance and expertise and thus founded Kolkata Debating Circle, a center of excellence with various festivals in India. He has special interest in health economics, what you have been listening, and also various policy concerns. Finally, he is a human doctor with charisma and compassion. I feel proud of him as a worthy son of the soil and one of my brightest students from Medical College, Calcutta. So this is the brief introduction of,
Sir, thank you. Thank you. So kind of you, sir.
Would you just be kind enough to show us the book and then cut the thread and formally release the book, sir? So this has really been a fascinating discussion, Kunal, and just to tell you, we really don't have a lot of time to answer questions, but there have been a lot of questions which maybe I'll share with you later on, and if you want.
Please do.
Sir, if you would just show us the book and maybe cut the ribbon. Is there a problem finding the book? Professor Shukumar Mukherjee is a physician.
Sorry for the interruption.
So
I'm coming back. Just give me 1 minute time. Have you got me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sorry about the interruption. Now, about the scenario is changing since before 1980 and afterwards. So obviously, we have got a changed situation of the healthcare, and it was healthcare service before 1980. Now it has become a healthcare industry with a partial service. That is most important part. You please remember this. And he has coined the title of sickness of health from colonialism to corona. It is a very, very catchy, very, very tempting title, which one should always attempt to read. And obviously, I have gone to the 430 pages book in bits and pounds. And obviously, I have taken some of the important issues. I may miss some of the points which you may discuss afterwards, but I have picked up certain points for clarification and for your introspection. Elaborate fact-finding book of sickness of health by a brilliant gatecrasher, Dr. Kunal Sarkar, is an eye-opener which need introspection, a crucial analysis to find out the solution both for short term and the long term. Evolution of healthcare in stages started 3,000 years back with Ayurveda, Unani, homeopathy, Siddha, allopathy. But scientific approach in allopathy is an attractive proposal accepted by most of the scientific people or people with a scientific mind to support our healthcare system to a great extent. We pay our respect to our pioneers, Charako from Haridwara and Susruta from Taxila in medicine and surgery, respectively. Dr. Sarkar has marched over the years to bring out success and failure of healthcare system in India with diligence, and finally has brought out some remedial measures to ponder and to implement in subsequent periods of time. By definition, healthcare should be universal. It must be affordable. It must be accessible with a lasting benefit. Is it a myth or a reality? Public expenditure on health is around 1.3% of GDP. So obviously, is a poor one as per 2018 data, which is a meager one when developed countries and some developing countries have more than 3% and above. So we can well imagine we cannot compare Germany with India or Germany with West Bengal. There is a phenomenal advancement of healthcare science like cardiology, neuroscience, orthopedics, organ transplantation, imaging, and molecular biology. However, progress is not translated into benefit to reach each individual in our country. Since 1980, Dr. Sarkar pointed out the private sector had joined the bandwagon of the healthcare system with a public hospital to help the people. Now the private sector contribute 64% of healthcare, and with package system, technology-oriented support, not based on CSR model, but commerce model, brings economic disaster. Economic disaster. That's why the regulatory body has come into force to check the unnecessary cost of the treatment the people has to bear. So obviously this is the scenario. In before 1980, there was no question about the private sector and there was no disparity in the financing of the health. Whatever way the people are treated, I do not wish to comment that they are well treated, but there is always disparity between the quality of treatment and the patient suffering. Dr. Sarkar further emphasized the universal healthcare model for good health and well-being for sustainable development goal. That is very important. Whether it is achievable or not, I do not know, but ambitious program of NRHM, Ayush, Angshuman Bharat have been initiated by Government of India. Universal health insurance is a dire need to support the healthcare for the public. This is very important area, very sensitive area, insurance. Insurance is never considered before 1980, but after that it has come into force. And now the partners in the healthcare, hospital, doctors, patients, and the insurance. So obviously these are the 4 members in the treatment committee, which has to be come to a liaison so that you can offer best quality service to the people at large. High volume, low cost hospital pioneered by Dr. Devi Shetty is a new concept, tried to be in the Narayan Hridaylaya and Kolkata with mixed success. On the other hand, the people like Naresh Trehan or the people like the other people in South India have made in the different area to cater for the middle class people and above. So obviously there was a competition, but it has come out with a mixed success. Dr. Sarkar further pointed out some of the pressing challenges for healthcare delivery system, like suboptimal infrastructure. If you take infrastructure in a public and private hospital, it is in the infancy in the public hospital, gradually improving day by day. But on the other hand, the public hospital a private hospital has come, but there is a variable character because there is 1-tier, 2-tier, and 3-tier private hospital. That's why infrastructure cannot be the same, and that's why the support to the healthcare may not be the appropriate what we expect to do so. Human resource deficiency. In India, there is 1 doctor for 1,456 people, whereas WHO asks for 1 doctor for 1,000 people. On the other hand, nurses, 1.7 nurse per 1,000 people, but who says 2 nurse for 1,000 people. So obviously there is a disparity in the human resources, and that's why there is a disparity in the support service. Inadequate funding. If you look at the 1-tier, 2-tier, and 3-tier hospital, funding is not the same. So obviously there will be always a deficiency at the end of the day, and inadequate technological support. So these are our loopholes. These are our negatives in the private healthcare center. On the other hand, the remedial suggestion, which is plaguing the health of the country by Dr. Sarkar, are encouraging to note. It's very important that people are taking the public-private partnership. That is a very important way to adjust the cost of the treatment, giving the quality care to the most of the people. I think in Calcutta, I can say some of the hospitals have got this public-private partnership, and that is helping the people at a lower cost. Medical tourism, which is attempted in the west part of the India, and particularly the Bombay, Maharashtra, then came in the Delhi, and then very few trickle into the Calcutta or West Bengal, but it is coming to Tamil Nadu very way. So that is another way to revamp our economic support to give the patients a quality care. Improving healthcare technology, that is the standard of healthcare technology, and uniform usage, that is most important. There may be technology, but manpower is not there. There may be manpower, technology is not there. So there is a dissociation between the two. And finally, revamping health insurance. That is a very tricky part. Health insurance, nowadays what we see, health insurance and private hospital have got some kind of understanding, a network, and the doctor is never know what kind of support the insurance gives to the patients. So obviously there is a very non-transparent adjustment between the healthcare system and the insurance. In the India, we have got how many? 1/3 people have got the insurance, either public insurance, government insurance, or private insurance, corporate insurance, and various kinds of insurance is there. But one should be unified to give the support to the people. Ultimately, our target is patients. So obviously, we, all the four partners, should join together to negotiate and bring out the successful outcome of the patient. That is our motto. But motto is different according to the different sector. Some chapters like medicine and media is booming up. You will never see the medicine, that is media and the engineers, media the chartered accountant, or media of the other people. But medicine and media is a very catchy program. It actually emotionally hit the public at large. And sometimes you get the media judgment or media trial is also there, which hampers the doctor's approach in the patient care, and doctors become shaky. Second is brain drain. And most of the successful hospitals in India, who have got the most best students, they are going abroad. Not from the very district hospital or district colleges. So obviously, best of the brains are going out, and they do come or they do not come, that is up to them. When they see that the advantages of staying there is much better for personal gain, then they may not come back, or they may not face the situation odd. Because some of us, like Kunal, like Dr. Chatterjee, Sandip Chatterjee, myself, have come back to India in spite of the difficulties. I do not know how many of you, but I have done the 6 years of village service with my postgraduate qualification. But what for? Because there are no facilities at that time. This is a very important part. We have to consider the doctor's faith. Now, another is very important, doctors in the legal loopholes. That is very sensitive area. Doctors also afraid to face the emergency situation. Help does not come right way, and the doctors is always are punished from the 3 to 4 centers, either from the medical council, or from the crime branch, or from the clinical establishment, or even from the other quarters. So doctors in legal loopholes are a very important part, need special attention and revamping, rethinking, and correction. Society must appreciate doctors are not the foes of the society. Doctors are the friends of the society. Sometimes they fail. You cannot guarantee life. That message should go. Why the doctors are actually facing the violence of the people at the time of death. Position of MBBS. I think MBBS in 1970s and 60s is the masterpiece. He was a friend, philosopher, and guide. Today, what has happened to the doctors? We are now healthcare providers. Our name has changed. So obviously, concept is also changed. And from the friend, philosopher, guide to the healthcare, now we have become the healthcare providers. So that is also an important part. And the fate of MBBS, what has happened to MBBS? I think they are gradually devalued. We have got emergence of many specialization, many specialization. Everybody wants to go for the specialization. But we must have a family concept of support, a network of medical service, right from the family physician to the surgeon to the specialist and other. Now everybody goes to the specialist straight away without going through the family physician. This family physician concept is dwindled. And in emergency, the family physician is actually the God-saving person, not the specialist. So obviously we have got so much of difficulties about the MBBS data. And MBBS is almost like a licentiate course and almost similar to the quacks in the villages. In the villages, the quacks are practicing much better than MBBS because MBBS are not being duly honored or respected in the society. So this is the situation of the position of the MBBS. I have read through the special presentation of Professor P.N. Tandon, Nikhil Tandon, endocrinologist, Sandip Chatterjee, and Dr. Kapoor, and Dr. Robin Chakraborty, Dr. Gupta, Dr. Girinath. They are excellent. They are excellent, very stimulating. We are learning every day, and I am learning also from them in the specialization. But how much it is going to the people who really seek them, that is very important. Translation of this knowledge into practice is not uniform. And that is why we have got excellent doctors. We have got support system, but not everyone gets the benefit of the best of the brains in the country. Some special chapters are invited for this, and I regularly congratulate Dr. Kunal Sarkar for his inviting all these eminent people in health science to contribute, which is very brainstorming. Dr. Sarkar is a prolific debater, revitalizing in various health issues in the country. Finally, I have no hesitation to congratulate Dr. Sarkar for outstanding and authoritative presentation of success and failure of healthcare system of India, trying to revive a real slogan of health for all of 2000. Health for all came in 2000, but it is not materialized in practice. So obviously, I hope this book will all criticism, all controversies, all incisive decision. We may not agree in each and every point, but certainly it is an eye-opener for all of us to go through this and try to think in that way so that we can rectify at least some of them in our lifetime. This book should be read by healthcare workers, policymakers, and regulating bodies to brush up the different deficiencies and reshuffle whole system. May God bless our admirable student and celebrity, Dr. Kunal Sarkar, who happens to be my student. And I'm very proud of Kunal Sarkar, Sandip Chatterjee. They are all brilliant in their respective field. But in order to make the sensible healthcare, I think all-round effort has to be given, not a fragmentary effort of one side over the other. And we should all work together, standardize the treatment, make it treatment accountable to the higher authorities. Then in that case, we can cost containment can come not only with the medicine. If you take at the perspective of the hospital, how much is paid to the doctor? It's around 25%. 50% goes to the hospital, another 25% miscellaneous. So obviously, we have to make some kind of negotiable terms to make it worthwhile for the service and not for commercial industry. Over to you. Thank you again, Kunal. Thank you again for your good effort during the lockdown period for this book. I could not touch all of the points of 48 chapters in 430 pages in a short time, but it is worth reading. I will read again and again, pass it on to my healthcare worker to think about it, to dissect it, and come out with some solution, which may be short time or long time. Over to you, Kunal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thereby, we inaugurate the book,
yeah,
which you have seen, I have seen. This is a pleasure. Even it is useful to non-doctors to think about it, to question it, to challenge it and to make out a suggestion which can be useful in the totality for the benefit of the people of India, and possibly, and more so with the West Bengal with a 10 crore population.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And I think your comments come very appropriately on the 1st of July, Doctors' Day, because you sensitize the Bengal Club audience to some of the trials and tribulations of this profession. We've very much overshot our time, so I have great pleasure now to thank Kunal and to hand you over to Professor Chaitali Mitra to offer the vote of thanks. Chaitali, the all yours.
Good evening, everybody. It is a great privilege to say a thank you, joined by the President, the Chair, and the members of the Library Subcommittee of Bengal Club Kolkata today, to the living legends who have been with us conversing and inaugurating the book by Dr. Kunal Sarkar. Thank you, Dr. Kunal Sarkar, for your efforts to educate, not to polarize. Thanks to Dr. Chatterjee for your effort to upskill, question, and yet appreciate. Thanks to Dr. Sukumar Mukherjee for your presence and your valuable comments. Thanks to our ex-president, Dr. Tapas Raychaudhury, for your insights and comments. Many thanks to the participants and to Guru Dash for managing the electronic platform. And finally, a happy Doctors' Day to all the doctors on and off the day today. Good night and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you. Much obliged. Thank you. God bless you.